Hello, I'm Brett Thomas, leadership trainer, mentor, and coach, and I've been helping leaders solve their biggest problems, influence and motivate their teams, and guide their organizations to success for more than 20 years. I've written 10 books on leadership and created the world's most effective leadership development method, which has been adopted by more than 2,000 companies. In this free Reinventing Leadership video series, I'm answering some of the biggest questions leaders ask and helping to solve some of the toughest leadership problems. All of the videos in this series are based on my book, Reinventing Leadership. Discover the revolutionary method that thousands of leaders and organizations are using to rapidly improve leadership performance and organizational results. And if you want a copy, I'll give you a digital copy for free. Details at the end of this video. If you want to become a more influential, a more impactful, a more successful leader, then take a moment right now to watch this short video and grab a free copy of my book at the end of it. In this free video series, I'm answering 5 essential leadership questions. 1, why is it that most leadership development efforts fail, and what does actually work? 2, what leadership qualities and skills are most important to be successful as an organizational leader? 3, which leadership style works best? 4, what do effective leaders actually do? Is there a model or framework that can help me really understand exactly what I should be doing to be successful in my leadership role? 5, is there a fast and efficient method to improve my leadership skills and my ability to influence and motivate my team, hold people accountable, and guide my organization to success? In this video in the series, I'll answer the question, why is it that most leadership development efforts fail, and what does actually work? In my book, Reinventing Leadership, which I'll give you a free copy if you want, details at the end of the video, I spend a whole chapter answering this question. It's chapter 1, titled Bogus Leadership Advice. In this short video, I'm going to highlight some of the most important ideas from this chapter to help answer this important question. All right, let's start by going right to the book, and let's hear what some of the other leadership experts have to say about what I call bogus leadership and the leadership development industry. Bernard Bass, the well-respected leadership researcher and author, has noted any 2-day conference on leadership begins with 1 day of argumentation about what leadership means. MIT Sloan management professor John Van Manen has stated, even today, 3+ decades in, there's no real definition of it. Another well-known theorist, Fred Fiedler, observed, there are almost as many definitions of leadership as there are leadership theories, and there are almost as many theories of leadership as there are psychologists working in the field. William Deresiewicz, author of Excellent Sheep, points out that no one appears to know what the word even means. There seem to be 2 possibilities, he writes. The first is that it means nothing at all, or whatever definition is useful at any given time. The second is that it simply means being in charge. Esteemed Harvard professor Barbara Kellerman says, the leadership industry has failed over its roughly 40-year history to improve the human condition in any major, meaningful, or measurable way. In her book, The End of Leadership, she says, there is scant evidence that this enormous investment of time and money has paid off. The leadership development industry is estimated to be $15 billion a year in the U.S. and $50 billion per year worldwide. Leadership researcher and New York Times bestselling author Duff McDonald describes the leadership industry this way, most of it is bullshit. Unfortunately, there are few business school faculty members who could ever summon the courage to admit such a thing, but some do, and they use the same language. Jeffrey Pfeffer, a prominent Stanford management professor and author of numerous leadership books, including Leadership BS, Fixing Workplaces and Careers One Truth at a Time, writes, The single biggest barrier to effective leadership is, in my view, the leadership industry itself. Instead of telling people the skills and behaviors they need to be effective in getting things done, we tell them almost the opposite, blandishments about how we wish people would be and how we wish workplaces were. He continues, if one is at all sensitive to the human costs incurred as leaders flame out and lose their jobs, cares and concerns that I suspect many others share, then the continuing failure of the leadership industry in all of its forms and activities to make things better needs to be both explained and remedied. Well, hello, Brett Thomas here. My series of books, 10 and counting, my courses, my MBA and executive leadership programs, our Integral Leadership Academy, my new C-Suite leadership program at Growth Institute. I would say that all of these things and much of my professional career is devoted to just that, to explaining and remedying the disappointing and frankly shameful leadership development industry. This is a brief video, and I go into a lot more detail in the book and the free training I'm currently offering for my social media followers who grab a free copy of the book. So let me just briefly summarize why there is so much bogus leadership advice and why the leadership industry doesn't really develop leaders. And yeah, that includes most leadership coaching programs and most leadership training programs. Not all, but according to the research, it is 100% accurate to say that most leadership development efforts do not produce any meaningful results in terms of increasing leadership ability and skill. So, number one, most leadership trainers and coaches do not recognize leadership as a technical and complex skill, and instead speak about leader character traits, or qualities, as they often call them, rather than teaching specific techniques, behaviors, and skills. Jeffrey Pfeffer and other whistleblowers in the leadership development industry talk about this. In case you aren't aware of it, there is only one way to learn a complex skill. You must break it down into the sub-abilities or sub-skills, and then the techniques that make up those skills, and learn them and layer them on one at a time. And then when that becomes a habit, you layer on the next skill, and that creates the skill set, right? This is the only way to learn a complex skill, and that is the topic of part 5 in this series. Reason number 2, that there is so much bogus leadership advice out there and why the leadership development industry does not really develop leaders. Most leadership trainers and coaches focus primarily or even exclusively on the leader and underemphasize or completely ignore the leadership context. What is that? That's the specific circumstances that call for different leadership approaches. Number 3, most leadership trainers and coaches underemphasize or completely ignore the followers. Many of these authors speak about this. So they're ignoring the followers' worldviews, their values, beliefs, assumptions. They're ignoring the followers' specific needs and their preferences for certain types of leadership that they'll be resonant with and that they will voluntarily choose to follow and offer their discretionary effort. And the 4th reason that most leadership development efforts fail. Most leadership advice givers make one-size-fits-all pronouncements. That is the best way to lead, with all followers in all circumstances. Any leadership advice that fails to provide guidelines for which people and circumstances this method or approach will work is bad advice, because no leadership approach will work with all followers in all circumstances. And finally, reason number 5, most leadership advice is based on a very rudimentary and unsophisticated understanding of psychology. Very few advice givers have a working knowledge of positive psychology, interpersonal psychology, developmental psychology, or integral psychology, all of which are essential to make sense of such a complex field as organizational leadership. I can summarize all of this by saying that the vast majority of so-called leadership experts in today's leadership development industry do not know what leadership actually is, can't explain to customers how leadership actually works, and certainly do not understand how to develop this complex and technical skill that they don't even recognize as such. I realize this first video in the series puts a lot of emphasis on what does not work and what's wrong, and why the vast majority of leadership training and coaching programs are so bogus. I've done this because at the start of this video, I promised to answer two questions. Why is it that most leadership development efforts fail, and what actually works? Of course, I invite you to read the book, where I go into more detail, but I've at least given you an overview of why most leadership development efforts don't work. Now let me tell you exactly, precisely what does work and what works really well. Even though only a very small percentage of leadership trainers and coaches use the method that works, we certainly do know definitively what works, and we've been doing it for more than 20 years with more than 10,000 leaders in more than 2,000 companies. In fact, in addition to the corporate world, this method has been used by my nonprofit around the world in war-torn countries, generals in the army of developing democracies, regions struggling with religious conflict, and even remote tribal villages in Africa. This method works everywhere it's been tested, and that's a lot of places. So what does work? Number one, you must recognize leadership is a complex skill, no different than all the other complex skills that you've already learned as a child and as an adult in your personal and professional life. Sports, basketball, dribbling, passing, shooting, rebounding. The arts, let's take learning to play a musical instrument. Maybe you learn to play the piano or the guitar. Well, you have to learn how to make the notes, combine the notes into scales, then combine those notes again into chords, and then learn how to do chord progressions. Let's take martial arts. Mixed martial arts is very popular. There are 3 abilities you have to know and practice to do mixed martial arts: wrestling, kickboxing, and grappling. And I could go on and on. You already know what it takes to learn a complex skill. You have to ask yourself why all the trainers and coaches, or the vast majority of them, not all of them, that you've come across don't treat leadership as a complex skill. It's at least as complex as baseball, basketball, learning to play a musical instrument, or martial arts. To learn any complex skill, you have to break it down into the smaller abilities or skill sets, then learn the specific techniques for each. And you must layer on the techniques one layer at a time as you internalize them and as the habits turn into skills. So practice-based leadership, we start with the practice, that's the technique. You practice that until it becomes a habit. The habit then, after a number of weeks, turns into a skill. And then you start to layer on other techniques, practices that turn into skills. That creates skill sets. And then the skill sets bundled together, and there you have your abilities. This is called practice-based leadership. It's the method that my company and I pioneered over 20 years ago and have been refining and fine-tuning for 2 decades. A practice-based approach is the only way to learn a complex skill, period. You already know this. You've learned dozens of complex skills in your life. It's common sense, but you have to ask yourself why most leadership trainers and coaches don't approach leadership as a complex skill. The simple answer is they don't know that it is a complex skill. It's bogus advice, and you should not take that bogus advice. Number 3, you obviously have to know what the abilities are to practice, like the examples I gave, basketball, music, martial arts. You must have instruction from someone who's a legitimate expert in those specific leadership techniques. That is, specific behaviors, not mindset coaching. I talk about that in the book. I won't go into the detail here in this short video. This is the subject of parts 2, 4, and 5 in this series. So make sure to join me for those live or replay sessions. What does work? Number 4. You also have to stop taking advice from bogus advice givers who are projecting their unconscious bias onto you and their organizations. I go into a lot of detail about this in the book, and we'll get into this in other parts of this series. There are 4 distinct leadership paradigms, and you can call them styles or universal styles, and they only work with certain people and cultures. And they're a disaster if you use them with the wrong people and circumstances. In fact, it can make you as a leader lose your leadership credibility if you use the wrong approach with the wrong people. It can make you look clueless, or in the worst case, foolish. There is no one-size-fits-all to leadership. This is the subject of part 3 in this series, so make sure to join me for that. So that's all the time we have for this short video. Thanks for watching. If you found this video valuable, please like and subscribe to my channel. And as I mentioned, I'm giving away a free digital copy of my book, Reinventing Leadership, and a free training where I whiteboard out on video all the main ideas in the book, and I explain in very precise detail what all the most successful leaders do, their 3 abilities and 9 skill sets, and I tell you exactly how to implement the world's most effective leadership skill building method. If you want to become a more influential, impactful, and successful leader, then definitely take a moment to click the link below this video or point your browser to reinventingleadership.com. I look forward to continuing this conversation in the free training on my website. So click the link, and I'll see you shortly.